Okay, so good morning. Today's daf is daf Kaf Hey in Masechet Menachot. We are a little bit behind. We are going to begin today at the two dots, 5 lines up from the bottom of Kaf Daled Amud Aleph. So my apologies for falling even further behind. We started behind because we had to finish early on Tuesday, but now I have got us even further behind yesterday. So let me share my screen and we'll get started. So, hold on just a second. That's not the right daf. There we go. Here's the right daf sharing. Okay, so we're going to begin at the two dots, 5 lines from the bottom of Kaf Dalet and Aleph, and Rava is continuing our discussion of situations where a pre-Kamitza mincha is divided into two halves. So by Rava, Isaron shechilku. So you have the Isaron, which is a mincha amount of flour, shechilku, and you divided it. V'nitma, and now echad mehen, and one of the two halves became tameh. And then before it was in the bowl together, it became tameh. V'henichu bevisa, and now it was put into the mixing bowl. V'chazar tvul yom v'naga ba'osa tameh, and a tvul yom touched the tameh one. Mahu. What's the story? Do we say, now remember, if in fact it had not been tameh before it was put in the bowl and a tameh person touches it, these are two halves in one bowl. We have the concept of kli mitzarev, and that therefore, even though you only touched one of the halves and that half is not touching the other half, both halves are going to be tameh because it's all part of one sacrifice. And we also saw yesterday that if you put a third one in this same container, which was not part of the mincha, and you touch one of the two halves of the actual mincha, that third one does not become tameh because this is not about combining different things in the vessel. It's combining two elements that are part of the same mincha in the vessel. And so as a result, that's the situation. And so now the question is, what if the tameh status came beforehand, and now the status of this pile that is touched by the tvul yom doesn't really change? And so, do we say that because it was tameh already, it's essentially already filled with tuma, and therefore cannot become tameh again, and therefore cannot transfer to the other one? Or do we say no? There's no such thing as being filled with tuma. And Abaye responds, Amrle Abaye, Umi Amrina and Saba le tuma. Is it true that we would say that something is filled with tuma and can't have any more? But Tanan, we have the halacha, the following, when it comes to a zav or zava, where you have the halachas associated with tumas midras. So let's take a look. Sadin tameh. You have a sheet that is tameh, and the key is the next word at the top of kavdalan on a bed midras with a tuma of lying on it. And remember, this two key rules associated with tumas midras. One is that if you're sitting on a bunch of pillows or a bunch of sheets, even the sheets that are not being touched, if the person is a zav, are going to be tameh below. And they are so tameh that not only are they're not just considered a rishon latuma, because of course the avatuma is the person themselves, but they become an avatuma that can make other people tameh even. And so that is a radical aspect of it. And so that's the current status of this particular sheet. But now you take that sheet, v'asau vilon, and you turn it into a curtain. And now it's no longer something that's supposed to be sat on. It's something that's supposed to be put up and looked at, and therefore it loses its tumas amidras. So tahor min hamidras, it becomes tahor from tumas midras, but aval tame maga midras, but it becomes tame as a result of touching a midras, and the implication is that it effectively touched itself. But Rabbi Yossi disagrees. I'm a Rabbi Yossi. Be'eza midras nagazeh. What midras? What thing that was midras, meaning what avhatuma touched it? Ella she'im naga bo hazav tame maga hazav. Rather, no, it's not tame from touching a midras. It's tame because a zav touched it. And so as a result, that's the situation. Because of course, when it, in the natural case where it was sat on by the zav was touching it. And so doesn't that And when we say that the Zav touched it, Kinaga Bo Hazav Miyatame, even though the Zav touched it, potentially even after it was had tumas midras, we're going to say it becomes tame vafiu libasof, implying even at the end, even if he touched it only after it was tumas midras. And so that shows, as is Abaye's point, that you don't have this concept of being sova. So, amai, why should it be true? Lema sava le tuma, according to you, that Rava, who are asking this question, why should it even be possible of getting this tumas of a zav touching it? It already had tumas midras. You should say that it was already filled with the tuma of tumas midras. So Amar Le, Abaye responds, no, umimaita hai she'im naga bo azav lebasar midras, dilma mikame midras. Maybe he touched it beforehand. And that's why dahavya tuma chamura al tuma tkala. And so as a result, when the tumas midras comes later, it's a more severe kind of tuma, because remember, it makes it a av hatuma, whereas the touching just makes it a rishon latuma. Aval haka to idi v'idi tuma kala, but here in both cases, the tuma that's being touched it's by a tvul yom, and so that's a lighter form of tuma. So lo, as a result, maybe we would say that it is filled with tuma, and we don't add anything more to it. Ela misefa, fine. Abaye points out. Look at the end of that same at that same Mishnah that we were citing. This is a Mishnah in Kalim, Parakov Zayin, Mishnah Tet. But the Mishnah continues. Moda Rabbi Yossi b'shnei sedinim hamekupalin umunachin zalzeh. When you have two sheets, that was one lying on the other. They're folded. The yashav zav alayhen, and the zav sits on them, so he's touching the top one and not the bottom one. Shehe'elyon tame midras. The top one is tuma, his tame with tuma of midras. But takton tame midras. Umaga midras. It's got a double layer of tuma on it. It's tame of midras because the person is resting on it, and so as a result, it goes down even to the thing that he's not touching, and it is touching the top level, which has its own tumas midras, and so as a result, it's touching something with that is midras, and so as a result, it gets both levels. And yet, v'amai lema sava like tuma, we should say that it's filled with tuma, meaning how come it's getting both these layers of tuma? It should only get the most severe layer of tuma, namely the level of tuma, namely the tumas midras. And so, how come it's also getting the touching midras level of tuma? No, hasam bevas achas. No, here too. It's not satiated because it's all happening at the same time. But hacha b'zechar zeh. But here in the question that I'm asking, it's one after the other. And so as a result, maybe you would say it's not. And so as a result, we don't have an answer. So Rava's question's not answered. We don't know what the story is if somebody were to touch it after touching the tame pile after it was put into the container with the other pile. Okay, so now we have another statement of Rava about dividing the mincha, and Rava says the following. Amarava isaron shechilko. Again, we have the isaron that's being divided. Va'avad echad mehen, and then one of them got lost. V'hifrish achar tachtav, and then another one comes in its place. V'nimza rishon, but then you found the first one that was lost. V'harei shalashtan munachim bebisa, and you have now all three of them are in a mixing bowl. So again, we're going to call the original two A and B. B got lost. And now you have C, which was replaced it, but now you also have B because you found it. So A, B, and C are all in the container together. Nitma avud, if the lost one got tameh, so that's B got tameh, so that's case number one. Avud v'rishon mitztarfin. So then it and the original would combine together because the lost one was only a pair with A. It was never paired with C. C was its replacement. So as a result, A and B would become both tameh. Mufrash if you now had the C become Tameh, I'm sorry, Mufresh, Aim and Starf, and the C would not be combined with them, and so as a result, it would not be Tameh, it would remain Tahor. Nitma Mufresh, if the Tvul Yom came and touched and became the new one that was designated to replace when the one that got lost. So we're talking about C now. So C becomes Tameh, Mufresh Verishon Mitzdarfin. Again, C was only there to combine with A, and therefore A and C would become Tameh. But Avud, A Mitzdarf, the lost one, would not become Tameh with it. However, Nitma Rishon, if the first one became Tameh, if A became Tameh, well then Shneim Mitzdarfin. A was paired with B and it was paired with C, and so as a result, both of them would become Tameh because we're not sure which one, how we should pair it, because now we have all three in the same container. Abaye disagrees. He says no. Afilu Nitma Echad Mehen Nami. It doesn't make a difference which one of them becomes Tameh. Shneyen Mitzdarfin. Both of the others are going to be Tameh. So according to Abaye, all three become Tameh in each case, as they are all in, as Rashi says, as Gemara says, my Taima, Kulu b'nei Bikta dehadadi ninhu. All of them are in the same house. And Rashi tells us, 1, 2, 3, 5, 6, 6 lines up in the narrow lines of Rashi on Kafdal and Amabet, from the bottom, b'nei Bikta dehadadi, b'nei bayit echad. They're all part of the same house. Hain. Shekulan mikoach mincha echad ba'u. All of them are really part of the same mincha. And so as a result, when you make one of them tameh, it doesn't make a difference which one. All three are tameh because they're all part of the same mincha. V'chein le'inyan kmitza. And now Rava continues with his analysis when it comes to taking a kometz. Kamatz min ha'avud, if you take the kamitza from the one that got lost, shirav v'rishon ne'echalin. Well, you know what you can eat? You know what the Kohanim are allowed to eat from? Well, they can certainly have from B, because you took the kamitza from B, but they can also eat the remnants of A, meaning everything of A, because A was part of the same mincha as B. So mufresh eino nechal, but you cannot eat C because C had no mincha taken from it. Kamatz min hamufresh, and if you took the kamitza from C, shirav v'rishon nechalin. Well, then you could eat its remnants. You can eat the rest of C, and you can still eat all of A because A and C were a pair and constituted a single mincha. Avud eino nechal, but the lost one, namely B, you would not be able to eat. Kamatz min harishon. What about if you took the kamitza from the first one? Now, I would have thought that you should be able to eat from all three because all three are paired, but that's not the way it works. Shneihen eina nechalin. B and C you cannot eat from. So you can eat the shirayim of A, but you can't eat B and C. Why? Take a look at Rashi. Kamatz min harishon shneim ha'acherim. Now we're 2 lines up in the narrow lines of Rashi. Sharei shneihen nizkakin lekomso shel rishon, because both B and C are connected to the komets of the first one. The komets einu matir ella isaron, but the total amount that the kamitza is going to make edible is 1 isaron. It doesn't make 1.5 isarons edible. It makes 1 isaron edible. Oto chetzi shohofrash mimenu ve'echad min hachatzayin. So it will make the 1/2 from which you took the kamitza. That one will be edible, and the one and its other pair, min hachatzayin halalu, from the other ones. But v'kevan de lo yada ezehu. But we don't know which. If you take it from A, we don't know whether you're pairing it with B or you're pairing it with C. So lo nechal, lo zev, lo ze. You can't eat either of them. Abaye.
Why don't we know? Why don't we know? Because either one of B or C is in the pot, right?
Yes, both B and C are in the pot, but we
Both of them.
don't know when he takes from A. We don't know whether the true pair with A is B, and we don't know whether the true pair with A is C, and therefore you can eat the remnants of A, but we have no idea which one to pair it with. And so as a result, that's why you're not going to be okay. Now, we're going to have a response to this that's going to suggest a different point of view. So give me a few moments and maybe it'll come up that what you're thinking at the moment. Abaye Amar, afilu kamatz me'echad mehen, shnein einen echalin. No, Abaye disagrees and goes in the chumrah direction and says that that you can't eat from any piece, any of the halves that are not from which the kamitza is not taken, because all three of them are always considered part of the same mincha. My timer, kulo nami b'nei bikta da dadininu. They're all part of the same house. They're all part of the same mincha. You cannot take from any of them. So Maskif lo Rav Papa asks, the shirayim didei miyanechalin. But 1 second, using your logic, Abaye and Rava, you shouldn't be able to even eat the remnants of your own thing. Because why? Because ha'ika, and here the Shita Mekubetzes changes it to tilsa, or tilta. So ha'ika tilta to komets the low kariv. If you don't have anything in mind, well, then when you take the komets, you are thinking about all three piles. And now, if you're thinking about, because all three piles are part of the same mincha. And so as a result, when you think about all three piles, so then you're going to say, so then 1/3 of your actual mincha is not appropriate, because 1/3 of it is going on a pile that isn't really part of the mincha. So Maskiv la Rav Yitzchak braid to Rav Masharshia, and Rav Yitzchak asked the question even sharper, in another way. The komets gufei heichi karev. How could you even bring the komets if to goes plus a chulin? 1/3 ha'ika plus a chulin tilts a chulin. 1/3 of it is considered non-holy because it's on the wrong half isaron. So Rav Ashi explains. Komets bedaita to Kohen Talia Milsa. No, what matters is what the Kohen intended. The Kohen ki komets a isaron ka komets. He's only doing it for the correct isaron. And so as a result, the bottom line is, so Amar Rav Ashi, take a look at the last Rashi on the daf. So Hanach Tarti Pirche, these two questions, Lav Pirche, they're not really questions. The Kaven de lo kamatz elamina echad, because you only took the kamitza from one of them, kamitzas hamincha bedaita to Kohen talya. It all depends on what the Kohen intended. The Kohen ki kamatz adaita de isaron chad who the kamatz. He's only thinking about taking a kamitza from one isaron because that's what you're supposed to do. Hilkach komitz karav shirei rishon ne'achalin. Therefore, the first one that you take it from can be eaten. V'hashnayim Eina ne'achalin, and the other two cannot be eaten. This is now according to Abaye. Mishum de'ein la'amod al sofo, because you cannot be sure about the end. Eze mehen nitztarav imarishon bedasa Kohen. We don't know which one was combined by the Kohen's knowledge. Leo nitar bekomets, to be covered in the komets. So the situation that we're talking about is where the Kohen has in mind to do a full isaron, but he does not specify in his mind which of the others he's intending to cover. Implying, at least in my read of this, is that if he did make it explicit what he intended to cover, so then maybe actually it would work. So if he said explicitly, I'm taking this komets from A in order to cover A and B, well then A and B would be the shirayim, and that would be okay. But here we're dealing with a situation where he just said, I'm having in mind to take this komets from A to cover an isaron of what is here, but he does not explicitly say which two piles he is covering.
But that wouldn't work. That would only work if B is there. If B is lost and he's had intention
No.
to take B.
Remember our situation, Ken. The situation is B was found. So B was found and the replacement. So you have A, the original half number one. You have B, half number two that was lost and then found, and you have C, half number two that was replacement half for half number for the replacement half for half number two, which we're calling B. So as a result, you have three different half isarons in that container at the same time. Okay, so the next Mishnah considers what happens if the kometz becomes tameh or leaves the courtyard of the Beit Hamikdash, and we get into the powers of the tzitz. So nitma kometz, if the kometz became tameh, v'hikrivo, and it was brought. Presumably you're not supposed to bring it, but if it was brought, hatzitz miratza, the tzitz is going to the Kohen's headpiece is going to make it acceptable, and therefore it's going to all work, and it'll be a valid carbon mincha. Yatza, if however the kometz left the courtyard, v'hikrivu, and it was brought, Eina tzitz maratza. The tzitz doesn't work to make that acceptable. Shatzitz maratza al hatame ve'ena maratza al hayotzi. Because the tzitz can fix something that's wrong when the item is tameh, but it cannot fix what's wrong when the item leaves the courtyard. And let's just see what's the relevance of the tzitz being meratzeh. So Rashi tells us, first Rashi, v'hamincha kshera. So the mincha is kosher, and most importantly, v'hashirayim ne'achalin. For the kohanim's benefit, the kshirayim that are leftovers can actually be eaten, even though the kometz itself became tameh. All right. So now the Gemara is going to cite a brisa that is going to provide the scriptural basis for our Mishnah's ruling. So Tana Rabbanan, v'nasa Aaron es avon hakodashim, that it says with respect to the tzitz, this is a pasuk in Shmot Parakavchet, pasuk Lamechet, that the tzitz is on the Aaron's forehead, so that Aaron shall bear the sin of the sacred offerings. So what does that mean? What sin is he covering? Im tomar avon pigol, if you're going to tell me that it's the sin of pigol. And now here we mean not actual pigol. We're going to actually say, because that's going to be covered by the next item. Here we're saying that the intention was to consume outside the prescribed area. So usually pigol is outside the prescribed time, is you think that you're going to consume it outside the right time. Here we're going to say it's outside the right area. This is based on Rashi on Daf Kav Gimel Amud Bet in Zvachim, where this same language appears. So Harei Kvar Nemar Lo Yechashev. Well, with respect to pigol, the Torah already says that it's not going to be considered. So therefore, it can't possibly be valid. And Im Tomar Avonosar. And if you're going to tell me it's about leaving it over, and here again, it's not talking about actual leaving it over, it's talking about leaving it over, intending to leave it over. And why does it have to be that, not talking about actually leaving it over? Because if you actually left it over, it's kosher at this moment. There is no need for the tzitz to validate the bringing of the kometz, because the kometz is still totally kosher, because it's not going to be a problem with this mincha until the next day. And so as a result, it can't be that we're talking about leaving over the shirayim, actually leaving over the shirayim until the next day. So it must be that thinking that we're talking about intending to leave over the shirayim until the next day. So, but yet, when it comes to Nosa, Harei Kvar Nemar Lo Yeratzeh, the Torah already says it's not going to be accepted. So it implies it's never going to be accepted, even with the tzitz. So Ha Eino Nose Ella Avon Tuma. So what's left? It's got to be Tuma. And you know what? It makes sense that it's going to be Tuma as opposed to Nosar or Pigol. Shehutra Miklala B'tzibor. Because after all, Tuma is more lenient. We can permit Tuma from the general rule when we have a communal situation. In a communal situation, we're going to allow it, as Rashi tells us, Shehutra Miklala B'tzibor, T'ksiv B'tamid, because it says in connection with the Karban Tamid in Bamidbar Parakavchet, B'moado, it should be brought in its time, from which we learn Afilu B'tuma, even if it's Tameh. So as a result, that's the brisa. Now, Rabbi Zera asks a very important question. Ema avon yotze. How do you know that it's tuma and not that it's going out of the out of the courtyard. After all, shahuta miklalo bevama. We know that there is a special exception that with respect to going out of the courtyard, because when it comes to a bama, you're allowed to be outside the courtyard when you're allowed to offer sacrifices on a bama. So Amar le Abaye, Abaye explained, I'll tell you why it's covering Tuma and not Yotze. Because Amar Kra, L'Ratzon Lahahem Lifnei Hashem. When it came to that pasuk that we cited a few moments ago, the pasuk in Perek Kavchet, pasuk Lamed Chet, it says not just that it should bring, it's going to bear the sin of the sacred offerings, but the point is to bring favor, to bring them favor before Hashem. Avon dilifnei Hashem, we're talking about a sin that is happening in front of Hashem. Avon diyotze lo, but meaning in front of Hashem, meaning inside the Beis Hamikdash. But outside, when you take it outside the courtyard, that's no longer in front of Hashem, and therefore, before Hashem in the same context. Obviously, everything is before Hashem. But maskiv lo, so that's the explanation. So next question, maskiv lo Rabbi Ilah. Rabbi Ilah asks, Ema avon shmol. What about the sin of using the left hand? Well, that's shohuter miklal b'yom kippurim, which has an exception, because on Yom Kippur, when the Kohen Gadol goes into the Kodesh HaKodeshim with the fire pan and the spoon of the incense, and he's carrying everything in each of his hands, and he's got all his hands full, and you're absolutely supposed to use the left hand. So doesn't that show that that's an exception? And of course, that's the usage of the left hand is something that's inside the Beis Hamikdash. So Amar le Abaye, Amar Kra Avon. No, the Torah says Avon. It's a sin. Avon shahayabo utchiso. It's got to be something where when it, even though it's a sin, we're setting it aside. La puki Yom Kippurim, which excludes Yom Kippur. Dehechsheru bismol. There, you have to do it with your left hand. It's not just that we're allowing it to happen. You have to do it with your left hand. Rav Ashi gives an alternative read.
But isn't it, that's the Ketori in the left hand and the Gachalim on the right hand, because they're heavier.
Correct.
You use the right hand to hold it because it doesn't want to drop.
That's true, but you're using your left hand. And so the point is that, so again, Rabbi Ulah's question is maybe the idea that we're saying that the tzitz is maratza is the tzitz is maratza if a Kohen were to use his left hand as part of the services. And the answer is no, that's not what the tzitz is for, because the tzitz, in connection with the tzitz, it says avon, and avon is for something that is going to be, that when we allow it, is still a sin, like tuma, meaning when we say tuma hutro b'tzibor, we're saying that it's really supposed to be prohibited, but we're going to make an exception. But when it comes to Yom Kippur, it's not that the small hutra b'Yom Kippur. No, it is required on Yom Kippur. You can't do it without using both hands. So as a result, that's not that Abaye rejects Rabbi Ilah's question, and Rav Ashi offers a different explanation. Rav Ashi Amar Avon HaKodeshim. The key is that we're talking about a sin in the holy object, meaning that the problem is with the korban itself. V'lo avon hamaktishim, not a problem with the one who is making it holy, namely the Kohen. And so as a result, that's going to be another potential answer for why you don't, it can't be referring to the left hand. So Amar le Rav Sima braid the Rav Yeidi le Rav Ashi, v'Amar la Rav Sima braid the Rav Ashi le Rav Ashi. So either Rav Sima, his son, or Rav Sima, the son of Rav Yeidi, asked Rav Ashi, ve'ema avon balmum. Maybe it's this dealing with a sin where the animal has some blemish in it. Shehuter miklalo ba'ofos, because when it comes to birds, we are allowed to use animals that have a blemish. You just can't use animals that are missing limbs. To Amarmar, to tamus v'zachrus b'vehema. We have a teaching that says that you need to have that the animal be complete and male when it comes to an animal sacrifice. But we don't have that requirement with respect to bird offerings. So Amar Le, Rav Ashi responded, Alecha Amar Kra. That's why the Torah said the following, Lo Yeratzeh. It shall not be accepted. Ki lo l'ratzon yiyeh lachem, for it will not bring favor to you, meaning that it's never going to be accepted. So again, this is similar to the answers that the Brisa gave. And so as a result, what are we left with? We're only left with Tuma, and therefore that is what the tzitz is maratza. So Tanarabanan, Dam Shenitma Uzarko. So now the Gemara quotes another brisa regarding the tzitz providing acceptability. So we have blood that became tamei, and a kohen threw it anyway against the altar. Bishogeg hurtza. If he did so inadvertently, it's going to be accepted. B'mezid lo hurtza. If it was done unintentionally, it's not going to be accepted. So b'medvar mamurim, what are we talking about? B'yachid, that's with a korban, an individual korban. Aval b'tzibor, if it was a communal korban, bein b'shogeg, bein b'meitzid hurtza. Doesn't make a difference whether the throwing was done intentionally or unintentionally, inadvertently or inadvertently. And on the other hand, it's going to be accepted. But when it comes to a non-Jew's sacrifice, Bein b'shogeg, bein b'mezid, bein b'onus, bein b'ratzon, doesn't make a difference how you bring it. Lo hurtza. It's not going to actually be accepted. It needs to be perfect. A non-Jewish sacrifice needs to be done perfectly. The tzitz is not going to help out. Or minhu, but 1 second. So here we have a differentiation between inadvertent and deliberate. But now we're going to show that there's a situation where it says that it doesn't make a difference whether it's inadvertent or deliberate. Because uraminu, alma tzitz maratza, what does the tzitz create acceptance for? Al hadam, v'al habasar, v'al ha'chelev shenitma. It's for when a blood meat, or chelev became tameh. Bein b'shogeg, bein b'mezid. It doesn't make a difference whether it was inadvertent or deliberate. Bein b'onus, bein b'ratzon, bein b'yachid, bein b'tzibor. Doesn't make a difference. It is always going to be maratza. Well, that differs because in the first case we said that when it comes to an individual sacrifice, it makes a difference whether it was inadvertent or deliberate. Inadvertent is good, deliberate is not. So we need to understand, why is deliberate for an individual okay in the second brisa and not okay in the first brisa? So we're going to give 4 different answers, and God willing, we'll get to all 4 of them today, but we'll see whether we're successful. Okay, so answer number 1, Amar Rabbi Yossi, lo kasha, it's not difficult. Ha Rabbi Yossi, the second brisa is Rabbi Yossi, who does not differentiate and says it doesn't make a difference whether it's deliberate or accidental. So ha Rabbanan, but the first brisa, which does differentiate, is the rabbis, Titania, because we have the following brisa that shows that the Tanakama differentiates and the Rabbi Yossi does not. You're not allowed, if you have produce that has become tameh, and you want to say, oh, I'm gonna make that the truma on my tahor produce, on my other produce that is tahor, you're not allowed to do that. V'im tarim, but if you did so, b'shogeg truma, so truma. If you did it accidentally, inadvertently, your truma is truma. B'mezid ain't truma, so truma. It's not going to work. We're going to say that effectively you're being punished. We're not going to allow you to get away with that kind of cheating of the Kohanim. So Rabbi Yossi says no. Bein b'shogeg, bein b'mezid, truma, so truma. It works no matter what. So here we see that Rabbi Yossi says when it comes to truma that it works no matter what. So too, when it comes to the tzitz, it will work no matter what. And when it comes to the rabbis are the Tanakama, they differentiate between deliberate, where it doesn't work, and accidental, where it does work. So everything is wonderful. Okay, though, but 1 second, let's go back to that second brisa, because there's another piece of that brisa where it talks about the meat, right? It says blood, meat, or chalev. So the meat became tummy. Now, what does it mean that the meat became tummy? That implies that it could be even potentially eaten. So Amar deshamat la Rabbi Yossi de lo kanis. I can hear, all right, I understand that you're telling me that he does not penalize somebody who takes truma intentionally from the tuma produce, tame produce, on the tahor produce, and we're not going to punish that person. But the meratzet sits alachilos mishamatle, but that doesn't necessarily mean that the tzitz is going to work with respect to to tuma to allow something to be eaten. Vahatanya. Indeed, we have the brisa because the second brisa again says that it even works on the meat. Vahatanya, and we in fact we have a brisa that says the following: Rabbi Eliezer Omer hatzitz maratza al achilos, that the tzitz will work to make even tamei meat acceptable. And Rabbi Yossi Omer, Eina tzitz maratza al achilos. The tzitz does not work for what's eaten. So you just said that Rabbi Yossi is the opinion that says it does work even on the meat. But we have a brisa that says it doesn't work according to Rabbi Yossi. All right, you know what? Apuch. We'll switch around those different opinions and we'll say Rabbi Eliezer Omer, Ein hatzitz maratza al achilos. Rabbi Yossi Omer, hatzitz maratza al achilos. And we'll say that Rabbi Yossi is the one who says that the tzitz works on food. So Bamaskif la Rav Sheshes says that doesn't work. Umi matzis afkat play. Are you able to actually reverse the opinions? Because I'm going to show you a brisa. It's a long brisa, so you're going to need to be patient. And this brisa is going to do the following. It's a long brisa. And at the very, very end of this brisa, you're going to see that what is the brisa going to say? It's going to say that the meat can be, that the tzitz affects acceptance even for meat. And we're then going to show that the opinion in this brisa is Rebbe Eliezer. And so as a result, if this brisa says that the tzitz affects acceptance and for meat, and if this brisa is according to Rebbe Eliezer, we can't switch around the opinions because you wanted to switch around the opinions to say that the Rebbe Eliezer says that the tzitz does not affect acceptance for meat. And so that doesn't work. So we would need to. So as a result, we're going to end up saying that you have to give a new answer. But let's understand the question by going through this brisa together.
Why
Again,
do they even ask the tzitz? Isn't there a question? Aren't we discussing whether something is kasher or not kasher? Why do we even have to bring the coin in to answer what we think we should know?
I don't understand. The tzitz is the forehead piece of
Correct.
equipment, and that tzitz we say even though I would have thought. Okay, here's a situation. I would have thought that if the blood is tame, okay, then the carbon's not good anymore. There's nothing that can be done. But it turns out that if the blood that's tame gets put on the altar, then it's a valid sacrifice. And the Kohanim are able to eat the meat. And the owner, if it's a shlamim, the owner's able to eat the meat. Everything ends up being a totally good sacrifice. How is that possible? That's what the tzitz allows us to overcome. That's the halacha that we're talking about. And so as a result, that the question is what happens if the meat itself is tameh? Do we allow us to throw the blood anyway, or do we say no and eat the meat, or do we say no? The meat is tameh. You can't do anything about it. It's not kosher. The whole thing has to be thrown out. That's the question about whether or not the tzitz is maratza on meat. So the intentions of the Kohen are nothing to do with here. That was a different conversation. We're not talking about anybody's intentions at the moment. So let's go through this brisa that gives again the details associated with various halachot associated with things that become tameh during the course of the bringing of an offering. Yachol basar shenitma lifnei zrikas damim. I might have thought that when it comes to meat that became tameh before you threw the blood on it, Yehu chayavin alav mishum tuma, that if you were to eat this tameh meat in a state of tuma, that you would be liable for kares, because we know that if somebody is tameh and they eat a sacrifice that is ready to be eaten, then you are subject to kares. That is the rule. And so I might think that it would even apply to the meat before you throw the blood on the altar, and whether the meat is tameh or tahor, it doesn't make a difference. If the person is tameh, then I would think that you would be liable. So Talmud Lomer, you're not liable. Kol tahor yochal basar. The only situation where you're going to be able to be liable for kares if you're tameh and you eat it is if you were able to eat it at some point in time. V'hanevesh asher tochal basar mizevach hashlamim asher laHashem v'tumaso alav v'nichrasa. It has to be that the person who eats from the shlamim offering that is Hashem's while his tumah is on him, that's who gets cut off. Hanitar l'tahorim, it has to be food that was capable of being eaten by somebody who is tahor. Chayavin alav mishum tuma. That's what a person will be liable for kares for if they eat it in the context of being tameh. V'she'ena nitar l'tahorin, if it was never permitted for somebody who is tahor, ein chayavin alav mishum tuma. It will not be something that will result in the liability of kares for eating in the state of tuma. Now, oh, Eno, 1 second. The brisa continues. Maybe you've overstepped your derivation. Maybe what it's saying is not that whether or not the meat was ever permitted to somebody who was tahor. Maybe it's that the meat right now is not permitted to somebody who's tahor. Ella nechal torim chayavin alav mishum tuma. Maybe it's only if it's right now fit for somebody to eat who's tahor, then it's going to be result in kares if you eat it while you're tameh. It's not just that it's possible that it was at one point in time capable to be eaten by somebody that is tahor. It's right now when the tameh person eats it, would a tahor person have been allowed to eat it? And when it's not now capable of being eaten by somebody who's tahor, you would not be able to eat it because you would not be liable for eating it if you're tameh. So otzi ani es halan ve'es hayotzi. You know what? If that were true, that would exclude meat that was left overnight and meat that left the courtyard when it was not supposed to. And in both of these cases, this is happening after the blood was thrown, and therefore after that meat became edible by somebody who is tahor. And so as a result, these two categories, if you were to say that we focus on the moment of the tameh person eating, you would say that that a tahor person can't eat it either, and therefore you shouldn't be liable. But we want the person to be liable for these two, because they are not fit to be eaten even by somebody who's tar, because they went out of the Beis Hamikdash, or they went out of the courtyard, or they went out, or they stayed overnight. So they either went beyond the time or beyond the place. So Talmud Lomar Asher La Hashem Riba, that the words Asher La Hashem come to include both of these categories, the category of going out and the category of staying overnight. And so as a result, if a tameh person eats food that stayed overnight, even though a tahor person is no longer allowed to eat it, because a tahor person was at one time allowed to eat it, a tameh person who eats it is going to be punished with kares. And similarly, even though the tahor person is not allowed to eat a piece of meat that went outside the courtyard now, or outside the Beis Hamikdash, or outside whatever the relevant area is, because he was at one time allowed to eat it, if a tameh person were to eat that piece of meat, it's going to result in the penalty of kares.
How can a tahor person eat something that's overnight? Isn't that no tar?
Yes, it is no tar. That's why he's
Uh,
not allowed to eat it. That's what I said.
But how could a tahor person ever eat it?
The tar person was able to eat it before it was
Oh,
overnight.
okay,
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 and because it before it was overnight, he was able to eat it. That's
okay,
why if a
okay.
tameh person were to eat it after it stayed overnight, he would be still subject to kares. So Yachol Sha'ani Marbe as Hapigulin ve'es Hanasaras. Maybe we should also include Pigul and Nosar. But 1 second, the Gemara now pauses our discussion of the Brisa to say that can't be the language of the Brisa. Nosaras Hainu Lan. The Nosar and Lan are the same thing. How can you possibly say that maybe we should include it? We just said we do include it. El Av Hapigulin Kinotarot. No, maybe we should also include Pigul, just like we're including notar. So Talmud Lomar mizebach hashlamim miyat. No, the fact that we limit have a limiting nature in this pasuk because it says only the shlamim. It only references a single sacrifice. So even though we're going to apply it to more broadly to all different kinds of sacrifices, we're going to say that we're excluding pigul. So umara is lo rabos as elu ulahotzi as elu. And why are you including things that are left overnight or things that go out of the Beis Hamikdash or the relevant area, and you're excluding pigul? So as a result, again, what this means is that if a Tame person eats pigul, they would not be subject to kares for being Tame. Now, of course, if they knew it was pigul, eating pigul creates its own punishment of kares. So the case that we're talking about must be a case where you didn't know it was pigul, you just knew that it was kodesh, and you thought that it was be okay to eat it, but you yourself are tameh, so then you would be subject to kares for being you would not be subject to kares for being tameh and eating it. So how do I know? So why am I including leaving overnight and that which goes out in the punishment of kares, and not including pigul if the person is tameh and eats it? So achar sheriba kasav umiyat amart. So after we have an inclusion and exclusion, we're going to say marba ani es elu shahaisa lehen shas kakosher. We're going to include things that have a moment of being kosher to somebody who is tahor. Umotzi ani es elu shelo haisa lehen shas kakosher. When it comes to pigul, it was never kosher for somebody who was tahor. Ve'im tomar, and now we get to the final line. This is the final line of the brisa. And again, remember that we're bringing this brisa because the idea is to show that Rabbi Eliezer says that when it comes to the tzitz, it is miratze even for food. So ve'im tomar basar shenitma lifnei zrikas damim, that when it comes to meat that became tameh before you threw the blood, ve'achlo la'achar zrikas damim, and now you go and you eat that meat that was tameh after you threw the blood. So mipnei machayavin alav mishum tuma. If you yourself are tameh, why do we say that in that case you are liable for kares? After all, that meat was never kosher. The meat was tameh even before you threw the blood. So once the blood was thrown, it's still tameh meat. So how could it be eaten? And the answer is mimnei shehatzitz miratze. The tzitz does an acceptance and allows us to eat this meat. So clearly this brisa is consistent with the opinion that the tzitz works on food. So implication.
Why was it maratze if it's tameh? The whole thing is tameh.
Yes, that's exactly that's the magic of the tzitz. The tzitz is a magical piece of equipment of the Kohen Gadol that magically it allows, even though something is tameh and should not be brought on the altar, it allows, and therefore you might think it should be a puzzle offering if it was brought on the offering on the altar. Magic. The tzitz does miraculous things. The tzitz, Hashem is.
No, I'm trying to understand what it does, but the question is why? Well, why would it allow it?
Because the Torah tells us that it allows it. I don't know. It's a xeris hakasav. I don't have an explanation of. Well, I mean, I have an explanation of why this particular thing as opposed to anything else. That's what we just went through. But as to how come the tzitz, how come we even have this possibility? I guess I would say to you the following: that why, because tuma is such a common thing. You can have, if you have a creepy crawly animal that touches something, it is very possible, very likely that you have tuma all over the place that you don't know about. And so as a result, the Torah is giving us a mechanism to say that don't worry about that. It knows our nature of being OCD and says, you know what? Don't be OCD about this. You don't need to worry about about tumas hatahom, etc., and the various possible things that you could end up with tuma in the Beis Hamikdash. It's okay. It's okay. We're gonna. So that's my logic as to it. But as to whether that we haven't gotten any, nobody's given us any logic. There's no logic in the explicit in the Torah about it. That's just my explanation as to why we would particularly say that tuma we would be lenient in that regard. But the bottom line is that we don't have the bottom line of what we're talking about is that even though this piece of meat was tameh before you threw the blood, and therefore should never have been considered kosher. And we just said that when somebody's tameh eats a piece of kodesh, it has to be a piece of kodesh that had a moment of that a tahor person could have eaten it. But this tameh piece of meat never had that moment. And yet we say that if a tameh person were to eat that piece of meat after the blood was thrown, it's still going to be a punishment of kares for that person. And how come? The answer is because the tzitz is miratza, and the tzitz undoes the tuma associated with this piece of meat. And again, that shows that the tzitz works on food. So nitma in, if it was tameh the meat, it would work. But yotze lo, if the meat had gone out before the blood was thrown, and so as a result, the meat was never kosher in that instance, it would not work. So, man shamat le de amar ains rika moelis liyotze. Who is it that has this principle that throwing blood doesn't make meat kosher if it left the right area of the Beis Hamikdash? That's Rabbi Eliezer. This is Rabbi Eliezer. And so this brisa must be Rabbi Eliezer because he's distinguishing between the tzitz working for tuma and nothing, and then there not being any throwing, and there's no throwing of the blood for Yosei. And so as a result, that's Rabbi Eliezer and the Katani de Maratza tzitz al achilas, and the tzitz is working for food. So it cannot be that we switch around the opinions. Because when we switched around the opinions, we were saying that Rabbi Eliezer would say that the tzitz does not work for food, but he clearly does say that it works for food. So as a result, we changed our first answer and we go to second answer. Ella Amar of Chista Lo Kasha Ha Rabbi Eliezer Ha Rabbanan. Rabbi Eliezer is the one who says that we're not going to penalize a person whether or not they did it intentionally or unintentionally, and it's the rabbis who differentiate, and they say the first brisa, which says that an individual, when it's for a personal sacrifice, if it's done intentionally, it's not going to work. But if it's done unintentionally, it does work. And Rabbi Eliezer doesn't distinguish. But one second, Amer shamat le Rabbi Eliezer de meratza tzitz alachilos delo kanis mi shamat le. Okay, you're right. You have shown to me how it must be that Rabbi Eliezer says that the tzitz works for food. And so that piece of the brisa, you're absolutely right, it goes with Rabbi Eliezer. But the other piece of the brisa is that he's not penalizing somebody who did something intentionally. How do I know that he won't penalize somebody who does something intentionally? Yes, that's right. He doesn't penalize him. Kihechi de shamat leila Rabbi Yossi, because he's just like he agrees with Rabbi Yossi. Shamat leila Rabbi Eliezer. He agrees. Rabbi Eliezer says the same thing. De Tanya, Rabbi Eliezer Omer, Bein b'shogig, bein b'mezid, truma so truma. In fact, Rabbi Eliezer agrees with Rabbi Yossi when it comes to taking truma from tameh on tahor, that we say that even if you do it intentionally, it works. So Amar Deshama Leila Rabbi Eliezer Betruma Tequila, but maybe Rabbi Eliezer is only allowing it in the Truma case because it's so lenient. Bekachim Dechamiri Mishamat. Are we going to allow it? Is he necessarily going to allow it in the connection with Kachim? Yeah, yes. The answer is yes. Because Im Kain, if you were to tell me that he doesn't, Ha'aman Tarmeh, who is this brisa going to be like? So that's answer number 2, is that the second brisa is Rabbi Eliezer and the first brisa is the rabbis. Now 2 more answers. Ravina Amar Tumaso Bein B'Shogeg Bein B'Mezid Hurtza. No, when we say, when it comes to the tuma, it doesn't make a difference how the item became tameh. whether the item became tameh because somebody intentionally made it tameh, or became tameh because it was an accident and he didn't know that he was tameh and he touched something to it, doesn't make a difference. But zrikaso b'shogeg hurtza b'mezid lo hurtza. So in the first brisa, where we differentiate between intentional and unintentional, we're not talking about how it became tameh. We're talking about the throwing of the blood. And if you go back to look at those brisas, it actually works very nicely with the language, because it says dam shenitme uzrako b'shogeg hurtza b'mezid lo hurtza. It seems like it's talking about the throwing that we're talking about. And so Ravina's explanation works very nicely with the language. And similarly with the second one, with the second brisa, right? The second brisa says, the second brisa says, al hadam v'al habasar v'al hachel shenitma bein b'shogeg bein b'mezid. So the second brisa seems to be talking about how the meat, blood, and chalev became tameh. So it works really nicely. Ravina's answer sort of definitely fits the words by far the best. But Rav Shila Amar, Rav Shila flips Ravina's answer. Zrika so bein b'shogeg bein b'mezid hurtza. According to him, the throwing of the blood, it doesn't make a difference whether it was done inadvertently or deliberately. It's going to work. Tumaso b'shogeg hurtza b'mezid lo hurtza. But when it comes to actively making it tameh, there it only works if it was done unintentionally, but if it was done deliberately, it won't work. One second though, Rav Shila. Now the way that Ravina fit nicely, Rav Shila doesn't. So we're going to ask the questions. Hak tani. This is the way the Shita Mikubetzis changes the languages. Shenitma bein b'shogeg bein b'mezid. It doesn't make a difference whether it was tameh deliberately or non-deliberately. That seems to be focusing on that the tuma doesn't make a difference whether it became tameh intentionally or not. So Hachikamar, no, this is how you read it. Nitma b'shogeg uzrako bein b'shogeg bein b'mezid. It became tameh inadvertently, but the person threw it, whether intentionally or unintentionally. And so as a result, that's the way you work it. Oh, with Tashma, but one second, what about the first brisa? Damshin nitma uzrako. B'shogeg hurtza, b'mezid lo hurtza. There it seems like the language of shogeg and mezid is going on the throwing. And so again, that seems to contradict Rav Shila. No, again, Hachikamer, we could reread it. Dam shenitma, when you have blood that became tameh, uzrako bein b'shogeg bein b'mezid, and you throw it, whether intentionally or unintentionally. So then, nitma b'shogeg hurtza, if it became tameh by accident, it's going to work. B'mezid lo hurtza, and if it became tameh intentionally, it's not going to work. And so as a result, we now have three. Sorry for not scrolling. We end up with three valid answers to our question. Rav Chisda, who attributes one brisa to Rabbi Eliezer and the other brisa to the rabbis, and Ravina, who says that the first brisa is talking about the throwing, and the second brisa is talking about how it became tameh. And so as a result, when it doesn't make a difference how it became tameh, according to Ravina, but it makes a difference whether or not you knew that it was tameh when you threw it, and you were doing intentionally to throw it. Then it wouldn't work for a yachid, for an individual's korban. And Rav Shila says no, it's not about it's okay whether you throw it intentionally or throw it unintentionally. That knowing about the tuma, that's not what is key to whether or not it affects acceptance. It's going to be accepted no matter what, no matter what your intention was with respect to throwing. The problematic intention for an individual's korban is, did the individual who made it tameh intend to make it tameh? Then that's going to be a problem. That's Rav Shila's interpretation. So we have three different interpretations to this set of brisas. And with that, we'll conclude as we're up to the next Mishnah and now caught up, Baruch Hashem, from the last several days.
If the tzitz is maratza and it makes this tameh piece kilu tahor, so that causes the right that person who would eat it receives karet. Is that correct?
Correct. What you're high, there are a couple pieces that additional facts that we
I
need to
understand that, but
include. But
that
yes,
person,
yes,
so
that's the
that
idea. That is the
okay.
idea.
So how is so the question I have then is how does the tzitz help the individual? It seems like it hurts the individual by making
In that case, you're absolutely right. It is hurting the individual. It's hurting somebody who was tameh and is eating kodesh. You're absolutely right in that situation. But the vast majority of
don't,
situations, it's
don't we
helping.
right, but don't we try, if I understood, the person who's paskening halacha, he tries to go out of his way, if possible, to find leniencies to help a person, whatever the thing is. You go to a rav, you go to a posek, he tries to find a way. Here it seems like this Sitz, who was the Kohen, who's the Gadol Ador here, is actually hurting the individual because he's giving him a punishment that rather than trying to find a way that he doesn't have a punishment.
Right, but remember, it's the tzitz isn't the Kohen Gadol paskening. The tzitz is doing is a piece of equipment that is accomplishing something for everyone. And what it is accomplishing for everyone is that if you were to eat a piece of meat that is tameh and you didn't realize it in the Beis Hamikdash, and you're supposed to be eating the piece of meat and you're tahor, everything is fine. You haven't done any sin. And that's the most common situation. That's the situation that we're dealing with. The unique situation of a tame person who is not supposed to be eating kodesh in the first place. And now when it comes to a sacrifice where the meat became tame before the throwing of the blood. So as a result, it never had a moment of kashrut. And yet, if the person were tahor and to eat it, we would not punish the person. If the person is tameh and eats it, now we have to punish the person. It's the two sides of the same coin, meaning the same coin the same ruling that allows the tahor person to not be punished for eating this tameh meat that never had a moment of taharut associated and was never kosher to be eaten because it became tameh before the blood was thrown. But now the blood was thrown and the person ate it and he didn't realize that it was tameh. And now he's told, "Oh no, you ate it and it was tameh. That's terrible." But it's maratza, and as a result, he's okay. But on the other hand, just in that same situation, it's just the flip side of the coin. Now we have a tame person who's not supposed to be in the Beis Hamikdash and is not supposed to eat kudshim, and now he eats that same piece of meat. Now we're in a stuck position because the same way that we allowed the tahor person to eat that piece of meat, now we have to prohibit the tame person from eating that piece of meat. And effectively, that tame person who eats that piece of meat is a tame person eating kudshim, and that results in kares.
Uh-huh. And does that even include also a person who's uh Tame Beli Yadia? He doesn't know he's Tame?
Well, Hashem understands the ramifications of not knowing, right? So the point is if you don't know, so then it's a shogeg situation, and then
Right.
and then that person would be obligated. This would be the situation where we talk about a korban olav yored. That person would be subject to a korban olav yored. That's exactly the korban olav yored situation. And so the point is, if the person was tahor, he would be subject to no penalty. And if he's tameh and didn't know it, then he's subject to a korban olav yored because he was tameh. He wasn't supposed to eat it, and it would have been a punishment of kares if he knew that he ate it. So as a result, we're going to have him bring a korban olav yored, the variable sin offering,
That's called
korban
Olav
olav
Yored.
yored.
Right. I just read that yesterday. There were three instances recorded. Maybe
Yep.
there wasn't there were three.
If you
One is
lie, the,
Me'ilah.
the one that we're
One
talking
is
about, Tameh eating tahor or Tameh going into the Beis Hamikdash. Second is if you lie
to
about
lie to someone, a false oath. Then there's
right.
Me'ilah, and then there's
Yep.
something about a relations with a Eved Ivri or a Canaanite woman. I don't remember what that. I
I'll
didn't
have
quite
to double
understand.
check. I'll have to double check. That I think that is where it's a the half. I think what you're referring to is the half slave, half free person
Yeah,
who is now engaged to somebody, and the
there was a
shipper.
reference to it, and there wasn't a complete reference when I
Yeah,
read this
I have to
yesterday.
double check, but
It was the Mishnah.
but
I was reading, learning the Mishnah on Yom Kippur, one of
yeah.
the Mishnah, and it didn't mention the one that you the Talmud Korban, just the one we just said now, Korban
No, no. If you're tame and
Talmud.
you eat a korban, or you go into the base of Migdash, those are each of them are subject to a korban
They
olivio.
didn't. The commentary didn't mention that one.
Yeah,
Mentioned
but
the other
there
three.
are there is yeah. Let me do some checking, and I'll
I
try to
mean, it could
answer.
be. It just didn't. And the
Yeah,
commentary I read, nothing to do with it. It
yeah,
was it
yeah,
mentioned the other three. It didn't mention
yeah.
this one
Okay.
for whatever reason. Maybe it just.
Yeah.
uh,
All right.
Okay.
Have a wonderful day. Looking forward to continuing our learning together.